We're going to talk. I'm going to spend some time talking today about, a little bit why this is important, the success framework, and all the work you're doing. A bit about the mindset, because you're going to hear more technical stuff today. Dr. Strayer on bad multitasking, Dr. Eva Wiseman about strategic measures, evidence-based practices. You're going to have specific tools from case studies from actual agencies, your peers, and what they've done to make improvements. So you're going to get pretty technical today, but I want to talk about what's the paradigm we need to have, and then essentially to simplify all this stuff we're doing, because sometimes you'll hear these terms that seem crazy and the jargon, and I want to distill it into the 3 big things we're doing to make a difference, and then finally we'll talk a little bit about measures. How do we know if we're getting better? I also want to acknowledge we have some great speakers here, so if they're in the audience, thanks for coming. So there should be a graph. Now, Lori's going to do the PowerPoint, and I always have this bet with myself. If I track the PowerPoints correctly, I get a Snickers at the end of the day. So it's this internal motivation. So hopefully I can do it. Are you on the second one? Conflict cloud. So some of you guys have seen this. Cabinet members have seen this. We've talked about it a little internally. But why do we care, right? It's really all about people. And to serve people, we have to have resources to do that. Well, you can see this chart. It's a revenue demand chart. And you can see revenue increasing in Utah. When you adjust it for inflation, our growth over the last 10 years has been 1.2%, and quite frankly, that's the envy of the country. In almost every measurable category, Utah dominates. If it's unemployment rate, economic diversity, labor participation, job growth, our numbers are fantastic. So we have great revenue growth in our major funding revenue streams compared to most states. So that's not been the problem. You can always have more, but it's like a family budget, right? You could have a lot of money in your family budget, but does it seem like it's never enough, right? No matter how much you have, even if you get a raise, you spend that and you can go to the next. The challenge is that our demand always exceeds available revenue. I don't care if we double, triple, quadruple our revenue, demand will always exceed it. To give an example here, 1.2% increase in revenue, 1.8% increase in motor vehicle registration, 1.8% increase in our prison population, which is getting better this year. I was just talking to Mike Hayden about that. We see 2% increase in our education enrollment, 6.2% average increase in Medicaid. That's where a lot of our funds go. And the list goes on and on. In addition, we have great ideas, right? We're always looking for ways to spend money, new things that we think we could do, new initiatives, and we go to resources. So we have this inherent conflict. We can do as much as we can to generate revenue, and that's what the governor's done, is to make Utah a real viable place where private sector wants to do business. At the same time, we have to look at the demand equation, and that's where we come out in. How do we meet as much as we can our needs internally, knowing that there are times when we have to go outside and ask for money, but how do we first meet our needs internally so that we can start addressing this inherent conflict? And as we do this, we're really using the budget as one way to start looking at that. I'll talk that later. But let's go to this next one. I think we got this from the Department of Commerce. I love this cartoon. You see this guy and he can't climb the ladders. Some of the cabinet members have seen this. If you don't know how to manage your resources, you'll never have enough. Do you get that? The guy can't use his ladders. I think it's funny. It's cute. He doesn't know how to use the ladders. So we have to know, it's great to say, find internal capacity, right? Get better, faster, cheaper. Ken Miller will talk about that all the time. He's one of our speakers today. But how do you do it, right? That's the tricky part. And that's what this success frameworks all do, is how do we know how to best manage our resources so that we can do a good job with all that. So let me give you 2 kind of examples, and then we'll get into some mindset issues. This is a picture of a tree, and you're like, why are we talking about trees? What's really interesting, tree scientists, have a very different way they approach trees. Most of us, if we just were to look at a tree, we would stand back and we would observe what's readily observable, what we can easily see. The tree trunk, we could guess what the tree size is and look up and see how big it is and what kind of tree it is. And we could get from what we can easily observe a sense of how the tree is doing. And we kind of do that with our systems, right? We get very easy feedback. So we'll look at customer complaints, we'll look at wait times, we'll look at stuff that we can easily read, policies, things like that, and we'll try to diagnose and get a sense of how our system's doing health-wise by just easily looking at what we can easily observe. But tree scientists do really interesting things. They know that just what you can see doesn't tell the whole story. They have to get on top, which is not easy, and look at the canopy of the tree so they can understand its ability to get light, photosynthesis, and its vitality. They'll often, if the tree's dead, cut it in half to get new information, right, about drought, infestation with insects, fire, and other signs that would tell them about what happened to this tree. And it's really interesting because when we talk about process improvement, we're not looking at just what's easy to do. What we want to start doing is digging a little deeper into our systems and seeing what's really, really going on. And sometimes it's counterintuitive. And I'll talk about that today, and you'll hear more from the speakers. But and this is what I said earlier about Governor Herbert, and I really mean this, we don't want to just knee-jerk react to what's in front of us. Because sometimes that's simply a symptom for a deeper problem going on. And if we keep treating the symptoms and not the root cause, we shouldn't be shocked when we continually see the same problems. And I've learned this the hard way. There's things I do differently 4 years ago that I would do differently today. But we have to start digging deeper into our systems. Another great example is a couple summers ago. Lori, you can go to the blueprint. My husband totally hates home improvement projects. And I'm always getting him into home improvement projects. So we wanted to do some stuff in our backyard. We hired a landscape architect. He came out. He'd been doing this for years. He designed this architectural plan for us to make our yard usable. We have a small yard. And great plan. On paper, it looked great. Really great on paper. And then we took it to the general contractors. Laura, you can go to the general contractor slide. What do you think the general contractors said? We went to 3 of them. They first said that it was going to cost $40,000, which was ridiculous, so ixnay on the whole plan. They said it really couldn't be done because the architect hadn't seen the utility lines and some of the pipes running under the ground to make what he was talking about possible. And that there are some reinforcement structures that we're going to need built that the architect didn't understand. I thought about this when we look at our systems. There's the challenge that we have is we've got really great public policy architects, and it's important. We have to know where we're going and have the big picture, right? And the architecture tells us kind of where we're going. But if the architect isn't combined and working closely with the general contractor to dig deep into the systems and to know how do you actually realize the vision, how do you make it real, we fail our citizens. We have a lot of great public policy architects across this country, right? We have think tanks, and we have masters of policy and all this great stuff, and it's important. But what I think we need to build up over time is the general contractors, the expertise to actually build it in a way that delivers the service to the customer, to the person at the end of the line that really needs it. And that's what our hope is. So the success framework is simply this idea of taking all the parts of an organization, audits and budget and organization design, and try to simplify this so we can bridge the gap. So that all of these pillars that we start to work on in isolation from each other, right? We start these separate initiatives, a technology initiative and a new policy, and they're good, important infrastructure pillars that hold up our system, but they don't help if they're not improving the flow of the entire system. If the individual coming into our system gets stuck along the way and can't get what he or she needs, or is getting a poor quality service, but we're really busy down here doing all this infrastructure stuff, it doesn't matter. What we want is pure harmony and alignment in everything we do with the single eye of achieving our goal for the customer and the taxpayer. Everything we should do should synchronize and align with our end goal. And that's part of what the success framework is. We don't have the acronym here. It should be in your brochure, but it means something. Set goals, right? Have measures. Use thinking tools. Do really good thinking about your systems. After you've done that, then you create your strategy. Then you create your organization, right? Sometimes we go into reorganization design without really understanding our strategies and our goals. We want to engage our staff, empower them. We want to synchronize all of our policies and our IT to make that happen. I'll talk about IT in a little bit. And then we want to stay focused. Dr. Schreier today is going to talk about, we're lucky to have a researcher here in the state of Utah who researches on bad multitasking. Probably many of you have heard us talk about bad multitasking. If you haven't, you hear it today and the impact that can have on our performance. So that's what we're trying to do in all this. Let me talk a little bit about some mindsets, and then we'll talk about the guts of the success framework. Try to simplify that. going through these, I'm going to talk a little bit professionally, what I've learned, but personally. And I think the mindsets are the same. Kind of how you do anything is how you do everything. And how we approach our professional and our personal lives tends to spill over. So hopefully this will resonate. But 5 things as I've watched other people, and I've made my own mistakes in my own life, in looking at systems and learn from those mistakes. These are things that I think are important, just having the right mindset. So the first one is this idea of thinking big. The governor talked about this, but it's really, really important to think big and have ambitious targets. Dr. Eli Goldratt, and again, maybe some of you have heard this, he was the founder of the theory of constraints. We use some of their work in our work. He was a physicist by training, brilliant, brilliant man. Unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was working with someone named Dr. Bernard, who we worked with, and Dr. Bernard relayed this story, which is great. Dr. Goldratt was consulting with a company, an international company. The company wanted to make $1 billion in profit and sales. So they get through, they're going through their fiscal year, and they're not getting close to hitting their target. So they come back to Dr. Goldratt and they say, well, what do we do? Now, what do you think instinctively, if you're not getting close to achieving what you want to achieve, what you do? We as humans want to scale back. Well, maybe that was too ambitious. Maybe we need to think differently. Maybe we need to bring that goal down. Dr. Goldratt, and really he's just one of the smartest men on the planet, said to them, double your goal. Go to $2 billion. Why do you think he would have told them that? I think he told them that because it made them think differently about how to get there. When we plan around success on the things that we know right in front of us, we'll never make progress. What's the great quote from Einstein? We need a new level of understanding of solving the problems that we have before us. That's a paraphrase. We can't solve the problems today with the same level of understanding we had yesterday, essentially. There's things we don't know. And if we wait to solve problems only until we have everything figured out, we'll never move forward. I learned this lesson very personally when I was back learning to use a cane in Maryland. And again, some of you guys will know this. I was in my 20s and had really just started to tank in my vision and had to learn a different way of doing my life. I went to a program, and there's lots of things you would do. But to graduate, they would put you in a van with a blindfold, and they would drive you around. We were in Baltimore, and they drop you off, and you had to get back to where you started, and you could only ask one question. My goal was not to end up in the heroin district while I was wandering the streets of Baltimore. So I know you served your mission there, Governor, but there are some sketchy places. So anyway, so to get ready for this, they would work with us every day on our orientation mobility skills. And I was at a park across from the building trying to figure out how to navigate the park. And it's a very confusing park. It's kind of like the Minneapolis airport, which I struggle with that airport all the time. But it's very tricky. And I could not get out of it. I could not get out of this park. And I just stopped because I couldn't figure out how to get out. And my teacher, who was way behind me, they'd often just let you go so you could learn from your mistakes, right? They didn't want to babysit you. But he could see I was struggling. He came up, and I had just stopped because often when we don't know what to do next, we just stop, right? The governor puts out this big goal. We need to improve by at least 25%. We're not sure if we can do it, so why even try? My teacher came up to me and he said, Kristen, you have to learn to walk through your confusion. You have to learn to walk through your fear. It had such an impact on me because I knew, and we talked about this after, he says, you're not going to get any more information by standing still. You've got to take a step forward, and it's taking the step forward into the unknown that's where knowledge happens. That's where learning happens. It's when we test what we don't know and we're willing to learn, maybe get a little lost, maybe it's a little messy, maybe it's not perfect at the same time. As we talk about tomorrow, we'll talk with some of you about rolling out this train the trainer and stuff. Some of you guys will be asking to facilitate projects in the next year. And that may seem scary and weird to you. But you don't know what you're capable of until you try and you think big. And you have confidence that through the process you'll learn and gain the insights and tools to figure it out. We're still within GOMB learning and figuring things out and pulling it together, and it will never end. So think big. That's a big part of it. That's huge. The next one is embrace constraints. So you may have these big, ambitious targets, and then along the way, inevitably, you will hit obstacles, right? And it's really easy when you hit an obstacle to say, yeah, well, I told you it couldn't happen. Yeah, I told you this wouldn't work. That's the easy way out. The courageous way is to figure out how to embrace constraints. Google had a really great contest a few years ago. I'm still waiting for them to do the Google car. I cannot wait for the Google car. That's a separate discussion. But they put this challenge out, and they said to some people, they gave it out, anyone could compete, said, you need to solve a major world problem. Major world problem. But here's the constraint. You only have $25, right? Most of us would say, what? I got to solve a major world problem? That's a $3 million deal I need, minimum. The people who won did something really innovative. They took a bike, and we know there's lots of malaria and challenges with water, dirty water in over Africa. So they took a bike, a cheap bike, and they put a water filtration system that's operated when people pedal. So as they would pedal, because they didn't have cars, they were walking to get their water, they would get the water, they would fill it up, the tank with the water, pedal back, and in pedaling back home, it would clean their water to deal with malaria and some of the problems, again, with dirty water. Simple, elegant solution that never would have occurred without the constraint. Challenges that you face in your systems can be seen as ways and opportunities to innovate. Not to be scared of, not to be frustrated by, but as opportunities to innovate and get better. On a personal story, there was this, one of my professors or teachers, blind teachers, brilliant man, really great man, Fred Schroeder. He was working with this little boy named Tony, and he worked with kids. And Tony was this little 7-year-old boy, and Tony wanted to learn to play tag. And Dr. Schroeder had some of the best expectations about blind people ever. He was such a great mentor to me. Pretty much thought blind people could do anything. And Tony came to him and said, can I play tag? And Dr. Schroeder said, well, let me think about it. So he went home that night, and he thought about it, and he came to the sad conclusion that on this one case, Tony was going to have to sit out. He just couldn't figure out a way to overcome this big constraint. So he went to school the next day, and but for the grace of God, Tony spoke first, right? And Tony said, Dr. Schroeder, I figured it out. And he got in these very simple jars and put pebbles in them and gave them to his friends, so as they would run, he could hear them, assuming they didn't cheat, because little boys can be sneaky. I have one. Assuming they don't cheat, can run around and he can hear the rocks and play tag. This mindset that Tony had, and we sometimes lose it as adults, right? We get so beaten down with every reason why something can't happen. Kids don't have that. We haven't messed them up yet, as kids. What Tony fundamentally asked was not if this could be done, but how. We can sometimes have a lot of reasons. If I had more money, if I had a different supervisor, if the economy were different, if this were different, if that were different, then I could have it. We need to start with how it can be done. It doesn't mean there aren't realistic challenges and things that will block us, but we don't ever want to start there. We want to start with how can my system improve? And just that mindset alone can open up so many opportunities. And that's just such a fundamental core piece of having continuous process improvement in what we do. So we want to think big, embrace constraints. The next thing is focus. There's been a lot of literature out there here lately. Lori, can you go to the slide? Great book by a guy named Greg McKeon. It's on the New York Best Times. Harvard Business Review did a great article on this. And he talks about essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of doing more. I cannot emphasize enough how incredibly important focus is in systems improvement. Waste, variation, opportunity to improve are everywhere in our systems and our organizations. Would you agree? They're everywhere. It's easy to come up with a list of things to do better. The question is selecting the few things that will have the biggest impact. This quote from Greg McKeon says, I was listening to an interview from him, and he said this, you guys can read it too, so if I paraphrase it, it's not perfect, but he says, we can make a millimeter of progress in a million directions, but there's another choice. And the other choice is we can choose a few things, and as a result, make a much greater contribution. We talk about multitasking and the impact that has. but staying relentlessly focused on the things that will make the biggest difference for your organization. Sure, you could spend time on something that will give you a 2% improvement, but can you find the thing that will help you find the 20%, the 30%? And Ken will talk about probably some of those issues later, looking at backlogs. There's a few things, and we'll be rolling that out for you guys in the next few months, that will give you the biggest leverage points. And staying so focused, and that is the hardest thing to do in leadership on the front line, is to not let your most precious resource, your time. Dr. Godrad talked about management time and attention is the biggest constraint in an organization. The biggest constraint is management, attention, and time. Not money, but where we spend our time and attention. And are we spending it on the highest leverage activities? Or are we getting totally absorbed by all the distractions? In the TOC world, we call them choop chicks. It's a Yiddish term, the least part of the least part. Are you chasing choop chicks? Are you working on the highest leverage activities? I did a few months ago, did the Grand Canyon rim to rim. 25 miles in a day. It was a tough hike. But it was also a little scary, and I know that some people, Fraser Bullock's speaking this afternoon, and the guy that led it was Fraser's COO. And I'm sure they're like, really, we're bringing a blind person on this trip? I'm sure they weren't excited. But we had rigged this gear that the guy I was hiking with, put a bear bell on his backpack so that I could stay focused on that bear bell. So as we crossed things, or there was, tricky stuff, we had some other gadgets we had arranged, I could stay focused on that bear bell. And that became the thing that really helped me get through that hike. We can get so easily distracted. The CEO of Lenovo, anyone heard of that group? It's one of the first global brand companies in the world. Originated from China in the 1980s. They just reincorporated it with a new name. But Lenovo dominates the PC sales market. $200 billion industry, and they dominate. Number one in the world in PC sales. The CEO is a second-time CEO. He was let go, and he's come back in 2008, 2009 to re-energize the company, and he has made it so successful. But when they interviewed him and they said, what would you do differently? He looked back at his career, and he had diversified and lost focus his first go-around. He tried to do too much. Just because it's a good idea doesn't mean we should chase it. We want to go over the best ideas, not just the good ones. He diversified too quickly. He lost focus of their core competency, and the company didn't thrive like it should have. He rechanged his approach, stayed very focused on core competencies with a selected set of strategies. Lenovo now dominates the PC market. So very interesting how important focus is. Two more quick things, and then we'll go into some strategies. The next one is work on your work. How many of you in this room feel like you have so much extra time that on a regular basis you can just step back and have the luxury to work on your work? Because you have so much time in your day, right? You just get to sit back and analyze how you do your work because you got so much time. It is hard. State government, people are on the front line, right? I'm a reformed federal bureaucrat. It is a whole different world on the state level. It is frontline, day-to-day crisis management, dealing with personnel issues and customer needs and turnaround times and the legislature and the never-ending requests from that. It's hard, really, really hard. And to take time away to work on your work, to step back and say, is this the best way to do my job, is hard. But people who do it can take a long-term perspective and have the discipline to understand that sacrifice means giving up something today for something better tomorrow. And they can stay disciplined to that and regularly and frequently work on their work. Interesting company in UK, there was a professor studying fertility companies of all things. And he noticed that some fertility companies after about 5 or 6 years were thriving, some not. And he started to do some pretty good data work to figure out what was going on. And what he found is that the fertility companies that were struggling 6 years ahead of time had made a decision. And their decision was short-term reactionary thinking. And it was, look, we're only going to treat the easy patients because we can get profitability out of the gate. The companies that were still thriving 6 or 7 years later had made another decision. They said, we're going to treat all patients. Difficult, easy, doesn't matter. Why would that matter in their long-term success? The doctors who made that long-term decision became better clinicians because they were dealing with difficult cases. And because of that, they became better doctors. When we can make decisions today to work on our work, understanding that long-term it will benefit us. The governor's looking long-term, 20, 30, 50 years out for what the state of Utah needs to look at. This isn't a short-term, one-time event. This is how do we manage our resources in the best way. If you're in forestry or natural resources, whatever it is, that in 20, 30, 40 years from now, we're maintaining the quality of life for our families. So think long-term and work on your work. And the final one, which I think is just really important, is be continually curious. One more example, really interesting guy over the London School of Business was working with a company called Guardian, a newspaper company. He asked the newspaper company, why do you make your sheets of paper so big? You know how newspapers are all so big? They didn't know, never knew, and they kept doing it. Small independent company came out and made smaller sized newspapers. So he did some research, and he found that in 1712, the British government had decided to tax newspaper companies based off the number of sheets, the number of pages they had, right? So to get around it, to create the loophole, they said, well, instead of producing 2 sheets, we'll do 1 and just make it much bigger. So it was their way of avoiding the tax implications. So the newspaper industry shifted, whoa, that would have been cute, to this big paper. And I know that was not even funny, Governor. I could have broken my heel, and these are my favorite shoes. We could have, they kept with these big newspaper things till like 1854, finally when the British government repealed the tax. But it had been going on for so long, they kept doing it. They just kept doing it. So what we have to think about is be continually curious. Dr. Goldratt would say one of his principles was never say you know. Never say you have it all figured out, because none of us do. We're always learning and growing. Be continually curious. Ask the difficult questions why. Don't assume the status quo is acceptable. Ask why you continually do this. And is it the best way to do this? And that mindset can make such a difference on your long-term success. So those are some of the principles that are really important for us is a mindset and state that, because without a paradigm of improvement, it's very difficult just to say, go out and do good work. You got to care and be passionate. The fact that you're here today makes a difference, because it's not easy. Inertia and entropy, those 2 physics laws, are hard to overcome. And it takes immense, relentless focus and determination to push through that, especially systemically. Okay, so those are some of our principles. Let's talk about the guts of what the success framework is quickly. There's 3 things we try to do. 1, maximize capacity. Simply means do more good. If you're a social worker, you spend less time on paperwork and more time helping kids. If you're a state trooper, you're spending more time actually patrolling and less time doing paperwork and taking people to sitting there and waiting in the courts, right? That you have more time to do more good. When we go to the agencies, we often do a gap analysis. Many of you have seen this. It's not uncommon. Is Kevin Fox in the room? Kevin uses, do you all know the blue light story? It's Kevin's. That's the Kevin who started blue light. If you don't know it, you'll hear it. Blue light really just symbolizes, are you doing the core thing you were meant to do, right? If you're a social worker and you're working with kids, you're there to help kids and families. You're not there to spend all your time doing QC reports and paperwork. So we want to maximize time, and when we go out to agencies and we assess what's your blue light time, what are you spending time doing the thing you're there to do, it's not uncommon for us to see 42%, 18%, 20% of the time is spent on those core activities. A lot of time is spent on a lot of other stuff. Sometimes it's necessary bad, sometimes it's just stuff we can get rid of. So we want to free up capacity to do more good on the things that we're here to do. Second one is we want to accelerate. We want to get faster. Why does that matter? One, it's a customer service thing, right? If you're a business and you want to do business in Utah, you want to get your license turned around quickly. If you're a customer needing benefits, you want them quickly. So it has a big customer service impact. But it also does some other really important things. Speed increases our capacity to do more. If I could help 20 people in 20 days, and now I can help 40 people in 20 days, I can do more with the same resources. Speed matters a great deal. All the big process improvement thinkers, if you talk at Lean or Six Sigma or TOC, talk about flow. We want to see uninterrupted, harmonious flow in our systems. And let me show you an example of what we don't want. If you can go to the FAST diagram. I won't spend time talking about what this is. It's a tool we use, and you may hear about it in some of the case studies today. FAST diagram, some people call it a fact diagram, and it's a tool out there. We've just made a few tweaks to it, but functional assessment is time and speed. Other people have other names for it. It gives you a sense of how messy our systems can be. I'm not going to go through the details on this, but if you track what happens to a person or a product as it moves through our systems, it can be messy. And if we don't step back to take a look at what's really happening, we're just playing whack-a-mole. What we want to understand is, where are we getting gummed up? Where are too many handoffs happening? Where are backlogs happening? Are we doing triage the right way? All this stuff. We want to see what's happening, because essentially we look at how long does it take to actually do the work, the actual work itself. It's a fraction of the time that the work just stays in the system, waiting to be worked on, hanging out, waiting for somebody to pay attention to it. In this example, 15.5 days from start to finish, but the actual work time, 4.5 days. I mean, you think like you got to get a check to somebody. How long does it take to really write the check? Like 2 minutes? But it just sits in our systems wandering around for days and days and days. We want to speed up. And then finally, quality is everything, right? We can get faster, we can do more, but if all we're doing is producing junk products, who cares? Quality is a huge deal, especially when we're talking about people. Vulnerable populations, kids, helping people get work, adults, vulnerable adults. It matters. It matters, and Dr. Eva Wiseman will talk about evidence-based practices today. How do we know our interventions will actually get us the outcomes that we want? But it matters a great deal. Things that we look at in quality: program effectiveness and outcomes, right? So you're going to do an intervention for a kid. Are they safe or not? Recidivism, adult probation and parole. Are fewer people coming back to our prison system or not? We look at accuracy, how accurate are our decisions, and reliability, which is a speed issue. Government looks at averages. Well, my average application time is 30 days. No, UPS, if you go to UPS, they tell you you'll have your package in within 5 to 7 days. You rely on that, and you believe that that will happen. Can you imagine if UPS said, well, on average, the package will be there within 10 days, which means 5 to 15? We need to become reliable in government, just like the private sector is, as much as we can. And there's ways to start uncovering where those opportunities are. So that's really kind of the essence of what we're about. Maximize, do more good, get faster, and improve quality. So all the case studies, all the tools we put out there, all the jargon you hear will be about those three things. And I'll tell you what, Gary Scheller's going to speak today, his case study. You know, he just knocked out of the park. He does victims reparations, so dealing with victims of violent crime. Nailed it, just I think a 67% improvement. And then he comes back and says, I want to do more. And is resetting all of his targets so he can get even better. I mean, it's exciting to see what's happening. So that's what we're really about. I'm going to talk quickly on measures, and then we'll wrap it up. Oh, let me tell you what success is not. Fatal 4. And this is just a warning. This is what we are not doing. We're not just, because sometimes we jump to these. We have problems in our systems. We treat the symptoms. So we just think if we train people more, that will be the solution. Well, you can train people, but if it's a bad process, that's not going to help. We'll automate it. We'll do more technology. Technology has a place and time. But I'll tell you what, and there's a couple systems, I'm not going to name names right now, but once they automated, their systems got slower. We only automate at the very end of understanding what we can squeeze out that's wasteful, that's not relevant, that's not helpful, and then we only automate that. Technology comes at the last. It's not about throwing more resources. If you throw money to something that's not as working as effectively as could, it doesn't help. And it's not about reorganization, right? It's not just moving boxes around on a chart. Those things are important. They come later in the process, but not now. So we don't want people to jump into that. I'm going to skip work environment. Steve will talk that, but I will just say this. We're all at different places within state government. The variety of services and products that are delivered in state government is staggering. It's a very complex company. And sometimes we may say, but that doesn't apply to me. I'm different. My environment is very different. I can't get better here. I will say this, and Dr. Holt, you would use this a lot. He's a good guy in the process improvement world, would say we're all special but not unique. There's not yet been one system we've come across that has not had the opportunity to improve. And we'll talk about these work environments later. Final thing is, I'll just give a quick thing on measures, is at the end of the day, we have to make sure what we do shows up. Sometimes, and I've experienced this a little, in my life, people will launch things, I'll launch things, and then it just disappears into the ether of bureaucracy, right? This big new promise technology that's going to create all this efficiency. And then where did it show up? Your budget's still the same. Quality's the same. We want to make sure as we go through this, we'll be baselining every system. Not a way to be punitive, but in a way to say, is this intervention working or not? Is this helping our capacity? Is this helping our quality? Is this helping our costs? And if it's not, then it gives us feedback that maybe we need to think differently about this. So we baseline everything. 2 cautions about measures. Too many measures can send conflicting messages to staff, can overcomplicate the system. We want to keep streamlined measures that align with the ultimate goal of the organization. And we have a handbook on that on our front page or on our website and lots of information, and we'll do continuous training on that. But we think that stuff has to show up. It's not our money. This is not our money. And if we're going to go to our family member and our neighbor and say, hey, give me $10, I'm going to invest this in a program. Your hard work money that you work for, I'm going to take it and invest it. We better be able to demonstrate that that is making a difference. We do not have resources to squander. So we need to know it shows up. And all of this integrates to our budget process, which we rolled out last week, which will be evaluating budget requests based off of its ability to make a difference in a measurable way. And finally, I'm going to skip operational measures. I'm going to skip SMIS, and I'll just go to the end and say, all of you may be at different levels in your organization. Some cabinet members, leadership, managers, supervisors. The governor said it so well with the piccolo. Anyone can make a difference, no matter where you are in the organization. Just starting something and just thinking certain ways can have trickle effects throughout your organization. And just know that what you guys do makes such a big difference, and it's just such an honor to work with so many of you. That's our goal for the rest of this next few years, is just to get better and to continue to lead the nation on what Utah can really do. So thanks so much for being here today, and we hope the rest of the session's great for you guys.